Hey y'all, it's Stacy. Welcome back to the kitchen. Let's jump in and make my 5-star rated chocolate chess pie. If you love this recipe, do me a favor, hit like and subscribe to the channel. That way you'll be notified every time we post great new content. Now, before we jump into the recipe, I want to talk to you about pie crust. Now, the recipe itself just calls for a 9-inch unbaked pie crust, but I want to talk about options for just a second. Now, if you've got a great recipe and some little extra time, a homemade pie crust is obviously going to taste better and have a better texture. With that being said, especially at the holidays, sometimes we need to shortcut things a little. A frozen pie crust in one of these aluminum shells works great. If you've got a little more time though, you can use one of these great refrigerated rolled pie crusts. These are pretty easy to work with and they allow you to use your own pie plate and they look homemade. So you can psych people out and tell them that you made it yourself. But I'm going to show you a few tips that I use when I work with these rolled pie crusts just to make this a little bit easier. Obviously, you're going to start by allowing this to sit at room temperature for about 15 minutes. If you try to work with this dough when it's really cold, it's going to crack or split. So allow it to rest. You don't want it quite at room temperature. You want it still to be chilled, but you want it to be pliable enough so that you can work with it easily without it falling apart. What I'm going to do is on my workbench here, I'm just going to gently unroll this, ensuring that it is warmed enough through that I can unroll it easily. And then no matter what, every time right here at the end, it's hard to get it unrolled and it starts to crack a little. So I'm going to show you what we're going to do for this. I'm just kind of pressing this out flat with my hands here. And then I'm going to turn it because each time that we turn this, we're ensuring that it's not sticking to our surface. I'm going to use a rolling pin here and I'm just going to gently roll from the center out all the way around. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind with this. We don't want to roll this too far. We don't want to roll it too thin. We don't want to stretch it too much because it's almost like gluten has a memory, and if we stretch it too much, it will sometimes shrink when it bakes. So we don't want to do too much here, but if we want to make the nice fluted crimped edge, we might need a little extra to work with, so rolling it out like this not only helps us to flatten that edge that was rolled up, but also gives us a little more to work with. All right, you can see that I've got that rolled out. It's just slightly bigger, maybe like ½ an inch bigger all the way around. And then I've got a 9-inch pie pan here. A couple things to keep in mind. I, typically have great success with metal pans. That's typically what I recommend. I will say though, as easy as these nonstick pans are to work with and to get your pie out, sometimes the crust will shrink a little because of course it's a nonstick pan. And if the crust doesn't have anything to grip to, sometimes it can slip right down the sides. I'll show you what that looks like. What I'm going to do here is I'm just laying this over the edges of my pan and trying to get it centered all the way around so we have a similar overlap all the way around the edge of the pan. It's important to not stretch this dough down. We kind of want to gently lift the edge up and press down so that, again, we're not stretching this dough too much. Just working gently with it because, of course, we don't want it to shrink by stretching it too much. I'm just working around the edge, making sure that it's stuck all the way down and firmly against the edge of our pie plate here. Next, what I'm going to do, if I had a ton of excess here, we could trim that off with a pair of kitchen shears. This seems to be pretty even, so I think we're good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take and fold this from the edge of the pie pan here to the edge of this. We're going to take that and fold that in half and just kind of pinch it together. We're going to work all the way around, just folding that over just like that. I'm just going to work all the way around the edge, just folding that over and pinching that edge together. And I'm going to go one more time around, just making sure that that's pinched together all the way around. And this edge is also going to help prevent our crust from sliding down into the pan while it bakes. Now, you can leave it just like this, or you can give it a little bit of a decorative edge. You could take a fork and kind of press the tines of the fork into the edge, or you can do what I do, just use your fingers to create a scalloped edge just like this. I take 2 fingers on this hand, my thumb and my forefinger, and I use my thumb on the other hand just to kind of create that crimped edge all the way around the crust. All right, I'm going to pop this in the fridge because we want to keep this dough cold. It will also help and serve as a little insurance policy to try to keep this dough from shrinking when it bakes. In the fridge while we make our pie filling. All right, let's make this filling. In a large bowl here, I've got 1.5 cups of regular granulated sugar. To that, I'm going to add 4 tablespoons of cocoa powder. And I've got 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. Now, some chess pie recipes use either flour or cornstarch as the thickener. I choose to use cornstarch because cornstarch thickens at a lower temperature. That means if for some reason your pie doesn't reach an internal temperature as high as it would need with flour, it's going to thicken faster because we used cornstarch rather than we used flour. I'm going to use a whisk here just to whisk our dry ingredients together. And this just helps ensure that since we didn't sift anything, that everything's all broken up and nice and combined. All right, to this we're going to add 2 eggs. And as I say all the time, make sure that you're cracking your eggs on a flat surface, not on the rim of the bowl, because oftentimes the rim of the bowl will force shell up into your egg. So crack on a flat surface. Crack your egg into a separate bowl, not your work bowl. It's a whole lot easier to fish a shell fragment out of this bowl than it is out of this bowl. And if you do get shell fragments in there, use pieces of your shell to scoop in and get those shell fragments out. Now, in my work bowl here, I'm going to add my eggs. I'm going to whisk these together just a little before we add them, just to give it a little bit of a head start. That goes in. I've got 4 tablespoons of butter that I've melted here, and I'm using unsalted butter, but you could use salted if that's all you've got. And I've got 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract or vanilla flavoring. I don't think that you have to use an expensive vanilla extract. I think some of the vanilla flavorings out there add just as much flavor and are a lot less expensive. Now let's talk about this little can here of evaporated milk. Now this is evaporated milk, not sweetened condensed milk. I sometimes get comments from folks saying that their pie was too liquidy. In almost every case, I think it's because they used the wrong size can of evaporated milk. When you head to the grocery store, they're going to have a couple options. There's a 5-ounce can, there's a 12-ounce can, and you might even find a big carton like this. Ensure that you're using a 5-ounce can of evaporated milk, not sweetened condensed milk. If you can only find it in this, just measure 5 ounces in a measuring cup. Give it a shake, pop it open. Using evaporated milk in this gives this pie a unique creaminess that regular milk just doesn't do. If you can't find evaporated milk, you can use something like half and half or heavy cream, but it won't be quite the same. I'm just going to whisk this together. All right, I've got my chilled pie crust here from the refrigerator. We're going to just pour our chocolate filling, and you can see just how easy it is to make this pie right in here. And chocolate chess pie gives you that delicious, intense chocolate flavor and that custardy-like filling. When it comes to Thanksgiving at our house, chocolate chess pie is an absolute must. I've got my oven preheated to 350 degrees. This is going to bake for 45 to 55 minutes. What you're going to notice is that it's going to puff up, it's going to develop this crust on the top, and when it's ready, you're going to have a slight jiggle to it, but not a whole lot. And I'll show you what that looks like in the oven. Now, I used a thick, sturdy pan today. If I were going to use one of those aluminum pans with the frozen pressed pie crust in it, you might want to pop that on a baking sheet or a pizza pan just to give you a little more sturdiness when putting it in the oven. All right, after about 45 minutes, you can see that our pie has a nice crust on the top. As it cools, you may find that that top cracks a little. That's a perfectly normal thing. It may not look as great, but it's going to taste amazing, I promise. You will see that on our pie here, we did see where the crust shrank along the edges just a little bit. Again, that's the risk that you take by using one of the rolled pie crusts and when you use a non-stick pan like this. The advantage to using a non-stick pan is obviously that it's going to be a whole lot easier to serve and your crust is not going to stick. So sometimes we have to make a little concession for convenience. When you pull your pie from the oven, you want it to have just a slight jiggle to it, but that's a pretty vague way to test doneness. You can actually use an instant read thermometer and ensure that your pie met a minimum temperature of 180 degrees, just to be sure that it's cooked all the way through and it's going to be nice and set. Speaking of it being set, we don't want to cut this while it's warm. We want this to cool to room temperature to allow it to firm up so that it slices nicely. You know, the hardest part about pie making is getting that first piece out. And as we've talked about different kinds of crust today, I will say that using those frozen pie crusts in the aluminum pan, there is an advantage here, because what you can do is when you have that thin aluminum crust, you can use some kitchen shears, cut your pie, snip the edge of that pan, pull it down, and you can slide your pie server right under the edge to get a really great slice out even with that first one. Obviously we didn't do that, so we're gonna do our best. I'm just gonna slice this, cutting all the way through to the bottom and ensuring that we cut that crust. And you can see that flaky top there. You can see that gooey chocolatey filling there. For me, it's a close competition between this chocolate chess pie and pecan pie, but this one, it might be my favorite. Yep, this one's my favorite. Folks, you can find this recipe by heading over to the website at southernbite.com. Just search for chocolate chess pie. Y'all enjoy.